Welcome, folks, to the latest installment of the Coaches Connect call. I am Coach Jeremy. We have a lovely and intelligent group of coaches with us here today. And we are going to go to Coach Michelle Dunstan first, as she has a question regarding working with a vegan client. Do you want to give us a little bit more background, Michelle?
So yes, I just recently started working with this client who basically needs to do some stress recovery, and I understand her background. Um, and so then I decided, looking at the five domains for recovery, nutrition being one of them, and enough protein. I just I wanted to give get an idea of what she was eating. So she
Mhm.
sent me like 3 days of eating, and immediately I could see um there was a lot of carbs, a lot. Um, but being vegan, and then I found out like not even no eggs, no dairy, and she hates fish. She hates all seafood. So it
Okay.
has been a challenge for me to try to figure out, okay, how can you um increase protein? One of the things she did try, oh, and she does fasted workouts. So she works out first thing in the morning and
Mhm.
without food. And then she was going into before she did stop that, basically just having a banana. And I'm like, basically
Gotcha.
sugar. And then her breakfast was very heavy carbs. So she did just order some vegan protein powder that I suggested to try to up her protein. But any suggestions anyone has would be fantastic.
Excellent. Well, I mean, thank you for that detailed summary. Juliet, you have some feedback.
Yeah, being a vegetarian plus fish, I can relate to your angst because it's a challenge. But may I suggest that you ask her more about protein, heavy protein foods like tempeh and tofu and seitan and then the combination of beans and whole grains and all that would basically bring her the amount of protein that she needs. I mean, and then you have grains like quinoa that are really heavy in proteins. And of course, we when we talk about proteins, we talk about the amino acids, and it's a question of balancing amino acids from a plant-based food with grains and plant-based food that are rich in protein, certain amino acids, plus the whole grain that will give her all the uh, amino acids that she needs to build for the body to build the proteins that she needs. Um, Definitely tofu, tempeh, those are like really, they're soybeans. And soybeans are the ones that have all the amino acids in it. Um, Another thing that comes to mind is making sure she's not vitamin B12 deficient. So you may want to ask her if she's had that test. Um,
Yeah, she takes a B12
okay.
supplement along with a multivitamin.
So how does that sound to you? Are you familiar
Yeah.
with tofu tempeh and all those?
Oh yeah, yeah.
You are, okay.
Yeah, she's doing it. It was just the balances are not right. So, based on what you said, is there a simple way to figure out like the amino acid profile for foods
Oh, I
to
think
figure
you
out
can
to?
you type it up in Google and
Oh,
I mean
okay.
on the web and you'll have all that. Uh,
Okay.
amino acids profile of all these different, whole grains for, plant-based food and yeah. Hmm.
Okay. Thank you.
Hmm.
Uh, Britt has some feedback as well. Actually, before we go to Britt, I just one thing I want to say. So, Michelle, what you'd be looking for is essentially a concept referred to kind of like as protein combining, where we're combining
Hmm.
specific vegan, vegetarian, plant-based foods to complement each other to help
Yes.
complete a more full amino profile. So, if anyone wasn't
Correct.
familiar, cool.
Yes.
Britt, you had some feedback as well.
Hey guys, I was just kind of curious. with like how you guys decided to come to like go from the stress like stress reduction to protein. Like what was the link in you deciding to go that direction? Was it her push or what, where did that come from?
No, we haven't fully discussed it, but she has some very distinct thoughts around food, hunger, and um, that have just felt like that was causing stress and feeling this feeling of fat, being fat, even though she's not. So there were thoughts around that. So let me take a look at the reality. That's what, that's why.
So using kind of a period of time to like audit her food choices to see
Yes.
like do they actually reflect kind of her internal monologue, or is there room to kind of change that narrative a little bit, and that may be a way of managing some of her perceived stress.
Right. And some, right, exactly. Not to mention, so when I talk to her, like normally, if I were, by the way, I just finished the SSR certification, so I just got certified. Um, the,
Congratulations.
the, I normally would have started with sleep with everyone, but
Mhm.
based on what she was telling me, her sleep is perfect. I was like, okay. So there wasn't much room to go there. So then I kind of shifted over to like looking at the five domains. Which one do I think it is probably the next best one for her? And it was nutrition. And the top of the nutrition one, is there enough protein? So I was like, well, let me figure it out.
Well, and I thanks for expressing that. I think I'm it's interesting and I would love to hear like because I just feel like so many of the clients that focus on, like I can't even get to the nutrition aspect yet because we've got to get through like a lot of times it's like, mindset aspects or things that are like kind of getting in their way, the thought processes. Um, and so anyway, I'm just kind of curious, which I'm like sometimes when you're doing like when you're working on if you can get them to if they're excited about like different goals that are focused like eating more protein, if they get behind that, then sometimes that can kind of boost their morale and kind of get them in the right direction. So I'm just kind of curious if like, yeah, is there a way? I mean, I'm sure it's different for every client, right? But like um, because sometimes I don't know when you were talking about like you went straight to protein, I was like, wait, this is interesting. I want to know more about this. And because
So it wasn't
yeah, is it motivated for the
immediately
client?
straight to protein, but
Yeah,
yes.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But I will tell you this also. One of the things when she's tracking her, like, track your meals for me, but really what I want to know is how do you feel an hour or two after you eat?
Mm.
That actually was the most enlightening portion of it. Like, um, I just started digging into that. Like, we just had our coaching call last night, and that is going to take a lot of digging because she never really told me how she felt. So there's some resistance there. And every time the comments were about hunger, I'm not hungry. I, okay. I asked how you felt, but it was all about hunger. Or I asked her to like, oh, let me back up a little bit. So one of the things she has told me is she does everything fast, eats fast, dries fast, does everything fast. So I was like, why don't you try some mindful eating? Take a bite, put the fork down, and just breathe before you pick up the fork again. Oh my goodness, there was a whole realm of thoughts around that too. So there's a lot that's adding to that will help in our recovery. But right now we're like focused on food, even though in her mind we're focused on food, but I'm really not. It's this mindset around it.
So just to summarize there real quick, Michelle, it sounds like stress management is the overarching uh, concept that she's hired you for, that you're at least exploring for
Mhm.
right now. You decided to explore stress management through the lens of nutrition, and you've assigned kind of let's look at protein intake. But really, what you're looking for to try and assess is kind of eating behaviors and her thoughts
Mhm.
regarding food,
Mhm.
fullness, hunger.
Mhm.
Those are the deeper conversations that we're looking for.
Yes.
But it is often quite useful to share an easier concept with a client initially instead of saying, hey, on day one, we're actually going to look at all these desperate behaviors that may influence stress. But I could just say, let's look at protein and then ask related questions that they already have an idea of how protein can have an influence there. And it gives them something to think about that is quite discrete, as opposed to here is this web of concepts that you
Yeah.
might not expect from me, or you might not have thought you hired me for. And at this early stage in the game, might cause a little bit of distress on the client's part because they don't feel like they have enough focus.
Right. Correct.
Cool. Excellent coaching judo here, by the way. Uh, in terms of some feedback that you got from Juliet, and also something that you mentioned yourself, you mentioned the idea that the proportions didn't feel correct. And I assume
Mm.
you're talking about like macronutrient balance there, so
Yeah,
proteins to
absolutely.
carbs to fats.
Yeah. Mhm.
Uh, One thing to note when working with vegan and vegetarian clients is uh, you'd also mentioned it's like carbs like really dominated landscape. I think that's going to be largely true, even
Yeah.
if you were to optimize for all things plant-based. Like we're always going to have a higher proportion of carbs simply because that's where their protein sources
Beans.
also come from. So moving the needle in terms of more protein is going to be useful, but you might not like we shouldn't have an expectation that we're going to get similar macros to someone who eats a more omnivorous diet.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, you also, it doesn't sound like you need information regarding specific food choices for this person. It sounds like you're quite well versed in terms of what is available, and also Google and other kind of like search engines will be a fine choice for giving you ideas on that front.
Hmm.
So my question is, how can we further support you? Because it sounds like you're on a good path right now.
That's
Uh,
basically, that sounds great. Like, if you think I'm on a good path, even though, like, yeah, the overarching is stress recovery, and then I'm working on protein. I just want to know if I'm missing anything. But I think the one, I forget who mentioned it, um, Juliet, about looking at the amino acids profiles for different foods. I hadn't thought about that. So,
Yeah, so the idea of combining certain plant-based protein sources to try and have a more full amino acid profile. I think it's a concept that's like it's lost some favor in like dietetic circles, but it still might be valuable enough in this concept that it feels like a targeted strategy for that client.
mhm.
I'm curious to know a little bit more about so it sounds like you're starting to at least explore kind of that subtext of like protein is good, getting more protein is valuable. That feels like enough direction for the client, but you're starting to engage in those conversations that exist below the surface of like, how do you feel? And you mentioned you got the feedback from her of, uh, they mentioned kind of like hunger and fullness right off the bat without any prompting, but it didn't sound like that's where you want to take the conversation. My question to you would be, how do you provide appropriate kind of guardrails to give that client a little bit more insight into what we're actually looking for, if you're not looking for hunger and fullness per se?
Yeah, I'm looking for a feeling. Like, uh, I look at hunger and fullness as states. Um,
Hmm.
Feeling is different. How do you feel after
Hmm.
a couple out after you've eaten? It's a different question. I didn't give her many guardrails.
Hmm.
And what I am coming to realize, she's not in touch with her feelings at all.
Fair. So some of the work that you may be doing next is kind of helping her to connect the dots here. So as Britt was
Okay.
saying before, it's like stress management led us to protein. Protein has led us to a sense of fullness in hunger and fullness. What is the
Hmm.
next layer that is below that? So you're mentioning kind of like feelings and connection to feelings, keeping that line of reasoning going so that they still have an action to take, but also potentially the vocabulary to help them express their thoughts here. Uh, oh, I'm Atlas of the Heart. Oh, Brene Brown. I'm not a huge Brene Brown bro, but I actually do think there's quite a bit of value in that work that she put out in terms of helping people to get the vocabulary to express their feelings a little bit more appropriately. You might need to do a little bit of work here in terms of giving a little bit of guidance without
Okay.
leading them too much.
Right. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
That's
just
funny
so
you
they can
mentioned
see
that
kind of
book.
like, yeah. Mhm.
I just started listening to it yesterday.
Uh, yeah, I mean, I'm not familiar with the entirety of her work, but that one, I don't know why it came across my desk, and I was like, you know what? I'm gonna give it a try. I think I got it free on Audible or something like that when I signed up. Uh, Actually, very, very useful.
Okay.
Having appropriate vocabulary for expressing some thoughts or sentiments can help to normalize certain situations where you're like, oh yeah, I'm not just mad. I'm this, and this. And that gives me more appropriate ways to deal with it. And also, if I'm in communication with another professional or my partner or a friend or something like that, we can have a more nuanced adult conversation that tends to be more productive than just like, here's a venting session, which is useful sometimes in coaching. But at the end of the day, if we're looking to get to an action, having the right vocabulary is more useful.
Perfect. That's a great
Cool.
thing.
Kinda, you had something you wanted to add?
Yes, hi, hello everyone. So I just have a couple of questions for you. Hi, Michelle. How old she is?
Um, she's in her 40s.
Ever 40s. And what is the plan? What is the goal to reach the how much she want to lose weight? So what she's looking for to reward.
Well, she had told me she would like not just maybe lose maybe 10 more pounds, but the goal is to keep it off. The goal is to keep it off.
To
She has lost weight before and gained it back. So keep it off. And that's why I think it's the mindset. There's a lot going on in her mind.
So my suggestion for you that your main focus now to find a way to make your client slow down.
Oh yeah.
So you said a major point here. You said that she's fast in driving, fast in working, fast in everything. Of course, she's gonna be fast in eating too.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what you need to put a spot on. So to make her slow down in eating is a part of a link of a big chain. We need to see up the reason who make her eat fast, right? So we're gonna go to the basic or for the top of the chain, and we look at that she is a person who do everything in speed. Of course, it's gonna link and end that she will also eat fast, which is not gonna control her weight, not gonna control, and not gonna be in the good shape she's looking for. Plus, people who's always or their personality that they are fast in everything and who speed everything. Of course, the sense of feeling it's gonna be short and temporary. So when you mentioned
Right.
something that she is not touch in her feeling, she do
Mhm.
not, of course. She will not even you ask her after a couple hours how you feel when you eat this meal or this type of food. She will not have any response because literally when she finished the bites, she don't, I want to go do this, I want to go do that. She's not gonna give her body and her mind time to understand what she ate and what is the results. And when I digested what happened to me, how I feel after that, she will not even think about it, or she not give herself her body a chance to get it. So
Process.
right, so the step one, let's try to change the client habit, try to find ways to make her slow down as a person, which gonna reach that she would slow down in her eating and start to understand the questions you're asking her about after a few hours how you feel, what you do, how you think, and what's your body reaction. About the vegetarian people, I am living here in the Brampton area on Ontario, so I am surrounded with the Indian community. And
Mm.
even in my gym, 80% of our members are Indian, so it was me to involve with the people that most of them they are vegetarians. That's why I'm mentioning that. Most of the Indian people they are go with the vegetarians. So I heard a lot about what they eat, what meals they cook, what is they count to protein and build muscles. And so I end of conclusion that, and even me, and for me, for myself, I always consider, let's call it beans,
Mhm.
lentils, chickpeas, we call it chickpeas in English, chickpeas, yes. What also we can say, beans, white beans, red beans, those kind, it's high protein, and there is lots of recipes. Plus, maybe you're gonna be surprised when I'm telling you that to make a protein effect on the body, when you add the greens leaves like spinach, like parsley, like cenote, we call it. I'm sorry, excuse my English. Those kind of leaves, green leaves, those kind, it's do them magical with the beans and
Mm.
give it a good resource what the body needs.
And
Plus,
I will say that was the one thing I noticed was missing when her chart was the lack of dark green leafy vegetables.
like,
So when I say the balance was off, that's part of what I was talking about.
Mm,
No, not enough.
gotcha.
yeah. Also, let's call the wheat and the salmonelle, those kind of dry instead of the rice, we replace them and we cook them as a kind of carb. But also, it's matched to eat with the for the vegetarian people more than to eat who do not eat meat. They sometimes soak the beans, they smash it, they make the veggie burgers with onion, with parsley, and they mix the chickpeas. It's really, and there's lots of ideas. You Google on YouTube and to help your client. And if you need any support from our side, you are more than welcome, of course. So I don't want to take time because I want to give back Jeremy the lead here, but want to tell you that focus for her to slow down as a person in her normal routine life because she's a disciplined woman. If she sleep in a good time, she work out every day, which is
Kind,
mean,
I'm gonna pause you there. It sounds
yeah,
like we have a strategy for at least the next action for Michelle. So I want to
yeah,
bring it back to you, Michelle, in
sorry.
terms of uh, next action for this person. It sounds like you've already come to the conclusion that it's like you're she's fast in many facets of life. There's
Yeah,
certainly value in slowing down here. What does that next conversation sound like to you?
yeah,
So one of the things, because I wanted to see if she noticed a difference, because last week it was just focusing on slowing down in her eating, and she said it was of course it was very hard for her. So this time I was like, okay, can you vary it? Let's vary it and see what you might notice. I just want to know what she notices. So you did slow today. The tomorrow do normal, your normal, even though I know that's fast. And then do fast, like after that. And then go back to slow. Just vary it and see if you notice the difference. So that was the next thing I did, just looking at some of the PN forms and everything. There could be something else. I want to like really get into the why, but the times I've asked why, like I'm not really getting anywhere. So I don't know. I'm open to suggestions as to next steps with her.
sorry to cut you,
Gotcha.
but in the end, sorry, just 1 second. I just studied on the unit one on our study that ask the crazy questions, the two crazy
Yeah.
questions in the opposite way. So ask her what is the good in speed in on be to eat fast, and the
Mm.
other question, what is the bad thing in slow down? and keep ask the five whys. Keep dig till herself by herself figure out that, oh, is she gonna end with awareness that maybe I must change. You know what I mean? Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Does
Sounds
maybe
that
it
good.
sound
can
like
work.
a
Yeah, that
uh,
that sounds good.
so I'll add a caveat onto this one. The
Mm-hmm.
value of the two crazy questions is typically in that it honors the current behavior. So what is the value of doing the thing that you're doing? It's a useful question to ask because it helps to upend the conversation a little bit. Most of the time, a client is expected to say, the way that you're currently doing things is incorrect and wrong and harmful. And hearing that is not easy feedback for most people to accept. So starting the conversation with, hey, what is good about this thing? What is
Mm-hmm.
valuable about this thing? Helps us to understand that this action exists for a reason. It's not something you're doing as a form of active self-harm. Let's examine what's valuable about it before we
Mm-hmm.
decide if there is a reason for change. Then you open the door with that second question about what might be valuable for changing it here. And that is the connection that goes all the way back up through eating specific foods, eating higher protein, and that is our connection to stress management. The reason that we're asking or exploring slow eating is because it is a form of stress management.
Yes. Yes.
And
Okay.
that's what puts the bow on this entire conversation. The other thing I want to say is I really think that the five whys should come with a disclaimer in that it is a useful tool, but very often feels like an interrogation. And
Mm-hmm.
especially if a client feels like I'm very attached to a way of doing things, a way of thinking, or certain beliefs, the five whys often comes across as me, your coach, looking for a vulnerability in the way that you, the client, do things. So it can be useful if you have a client who's quite open to exploration and uh, self-discovery. If you have a client who's like, I don't feel confident in my ability to change right now, it can sometimes back them into a corner.
Mm-hmm.
But the two crazy questions, I think, is a fantastic one because it creates a sense of safety before asking anything, before even
I like
proposing change.
it.
So thank you for that feedback, Kinda.
You're
That was good. Yes. I was kind of looking at like those forms and trying to figure out which is the best way to go. Um,
Mhm.
and that's why I ended up with the okay, let's try you did the slow, let's try the variability. Um,
Yeah,
and so yeah, we'll just keep adding on and keep exploring. Um, there's yeah. There's a lot.
from that from that kind of experiment that you gave your client, what outcome do you think would be expected kind of slash an ideal outcome for you as a coach?
Ooh, good question. I would say for her to notice the differences,
Mhm.
like to actually see maybe there are some benefits for slowing down. Um, so that I guess that's the number one for her to notice the importance of changing.
Mhm. Yep. I mean, it's an interesting conversation to kind of dance around because as much as we don't want to lead kind of their results and be like, yeah, here, I want you to try slowing down. I think it'll be fantastic. I think it'll be really valuable. Or go the same speed, or you know what, screw it, just go as fast as you want. I don't really care. Uh, Trying not to kind of like put too much of a connotation on those things. I do agree with you that the best outcome would likely be that they notice that, oh, I have more space. I feel more physically comforted. I feel like I enjoy my meals better. There's a whole bunch of positives that we would like to attach to slow eating, but phrasing it in a neutral way, I think, is probably the best way to go so that we get a true representation of what are the pros and what are the cons attached to each of these different styles. Uh, and then even from there, the goal is likely not to get to a place where it's like every meal from now into eternity is eaten at
Yeah.
20 minutes or more, but a better space of understanding how can I manage my stress with my eating as opposed to using eating as my only form of stress management. So that in places where I know that I'm like really heightened stress, the light bulb goes off as soon as I start to eat. And it's like, I can help manage my stress by intentionally slowing down this meal and taking a few extra minutes. And that means that I'm not more than like 5 or 10 minutes away from being in a better mindset than I was when I started this meal.
I love that. Oh,
Mhm.
yes. That was expressed beautifully. Thank you.
Fantastic. Yeah, I mean, I hope we get an update from this client when you're working with them. Getting someone who is like wired to be fast to slow down can be incredibly impactful. I'm glad to see that you took it through like the path of protein because in 2026, what can protein not do, honestly? We'll
I
put
know
another win
it's all
in that
everywhere.
column for protein, yeah. Uh, but yeah, getting them to slow down can often feel quite threatening. So leaving it as like a neutral, more experiment, you notice the pros, and then getting them to convince themselves that slowing down is valuable is going to be much more rewarding for you and lower energy for you as a coach than trying to
Mhm.
convince someone or force them into that box.
I agree. That was good. Yeah. I like the thank you for
Uh,
the importance of neutral language. So that was great.
mhm. uh, any final questions or thoughts for Michelle before we move on? Cool. Uh, I think this, well, we'll go with this one for right now. I think a little bit of an easier topic as our transition. So this next conversation is from Coach Tara Donovan, who's not here today. Tara, hopefully you catch the replay. But she was asking any suggestions for fun food tracking tools, any new apps, anything that pops up for folks. Curious to know, there's some feedback in the comments that I would encourage people to take a look at. But for coaches here, is there any way that you can get people to track their foods in a way that feels less tedious and less labor intensive potentially, or a way to just like make it more fun and enjoyable? One thing I will preface in this conversation, I don't know if it's useful to Coach Tara in the specific outcome that they're looking for, but any food tracking, the goal should be that we're looking to build awareness. So in some instances, we're looking for like closer or to the gram precision or a specific macro balance, but that's not always the case. So often we're looking for more awareness than we currently have so that we can make better choices than we currently are. So with that in mind, what comes to what pops up for you coaches here when thinking about tracking foods, any tools or any fun ways that you have encountered in your own journey as a coach or as a client?
I can
Michelle,
start. I guess,
please.
yeah, the number one question would be w- why are we tracking? Because that, like, you want to make it
Mhm.
fun, but what is the purpose? If it's just for awareness and that there's variety, using like the rainbow and having it on the refrigerator and coloring it in so you can
Mhm.
actually see these colors that you're intaking, is a fun
Yep.
and simple, easy way of tracking.
Yeah, and that's it's certainly worthwhile to differentiate for at the higher end of like goal and skill requirement, fun drops down precipitously unless you're a person who's like, I love measuring my food and I love making sure that I'm getting exactly 278 grams of protein. That could be someone's version of fun, but at that really high skill goal requirement, fun tends to be less of a consideration. So, as Michelle pointed out, on if we're not looking for really high precision, then there's certainly a way of getting some data there in terms of, and I wrote it down as kind of quality versus quantity. So, eating the rainbow and tracking that. So, to enhance food quality, uh, that is a visually stimulating way to do it. It's a little bit more fun, a little bit more adventurous. It doesn't put quite the same fine point on precision, but maybe we don't need to. Anyone else have any feedback? So while you're thinking, seeing as I had more time to think about this one than most people here, uh, other things I had on my list were like quality versus quantity. So making sure it's like diversity of food as opposed to specific grams or hand measurements. Things like using a bubble chart. So related to hand measurements, but an easier way to track. So it's just you give yourself like a little check mark every time you do the thing. Tends to also help with adherence and just lowering the barrier from a technical standpoint. So it's like I don't have to use an app. I just go into my kitchen, check, check, check every time I'm in there. And this is actually the only space where I regularly track, and outside in the rest of the world, I don't worry about it or I use a different tool set. Also something to consider. Uh, and then in terms of other food, fun ways to kind of do this, looking at it from the behavioral side. So less of specifically what I eat, but tracking how I feel, as Michelle mentioned in her instance as well, that working with the client. So less concerned about food quantity or quality, more concerned with how I feel either coming into meals, during meals, and my specific eating behaviors is another thing that we could also track. Uh, that is interactive in a way that doesn't require as much math, but maybe a little bit more introspection. I would also encourage folks to take a look at this conversation. I think there's some really good feedback as well. Coach Melissa De Natale Lawson mentioned using AI for this one and having some specific prompts to try and create kind of like your own journaling app through some trial and error. So take a look there. And then a lot of recommendations for more technical tracking apps like Chronometer or Macros First, things of that nature. Cool. Any questions or comments on fun food tracking or fun eating behavior tracking before we move on? Awesome. Let's move on to this next conversation from Coach Mike Gastineau. And Mike was mentioning that they are working with a client who is now 4 months pregnant, and they're having some issues sleeping. And it seems like we have a little bit of a female-dominated call today, so maybe we'll get some useful feedback here. Uh, the client has reached out for help and mentions that they can only sleep on their side and previously is a back and stomach sleeper. So they have trouble falling asleep, wakes up around 3 a.m., can't go back to sleep, and then once asleep, finally has an hour or so of REM sleep, but would like to likely increase that duration. Uh, any suggestions for better sleep? They feel like this is out of their scope of practice. Although I would potentially put an asterisk on this one. And before we go into this conversation, speaking specifically about scope, this is someone who's looking for improvements in sleep quality. Yes, they are pregnant, but we can likely still offer some general advice here. And then I'd also add that any advice here shared with someone who is experiencing a specific condition, always, always useful to refer them to their OBGYN or any particular practitioner who helps them to manage this condition. Uh, Pregnancy, I think, is one where it's like, if you feel like it's out of your scope, consider that it's out of your scope. Uh, we're helping someone to sleep. We're not treating anything specifically. But again, anytime there's a gray area, always better to lean into the side of caution and to refer out. But you can refer them with some potential strategies and then get them to get clearance from their medical person. Uh, Also, some useful feedback here. There's probably a few questions that I would ask, but I want to open it up to the coaches here, especially any of our coaches who have completed SSR or have experience with pregnancy, either from a partner or themselves. Any thoughts come up for you, coaches?
Questions come up. This would probably be one I'd refer out. And my questions that come up are why? What happens when you sleep on your side that you wake up after an hour? Are you uncomfortable? Is there pain? What is I would need to ask what's happening, and then I'd probably possibly give suggestions, but refer them to their doctor.
Fair. Yeah, I mean, the question I think is very valid here in terms of what specific issue are they running into. It sounds like it's a comfort and positional issue, which I think we can likely make some suggestions, especially if you have experience with pregnancy or working with pregnant clients. But then again, if there's a concern of any particular complications, uh, going to that medical professional is always A1 advice. Any additional feedback or questions from coaches here?
Just a thought. I've never been pregnant, so but if it's like used to being on their back and that pressure they're missing, maybe using something like a body pillow to provide um, when they're on their side, that a little bit of pressure could be something.
Yeah, and I mean, I think if you look into the comments here, there are some really useful suggestions as well. So things like a pregnancy pillow were recommended as a way to kind of like manage that positional change, uh, as well as just understanding again a little bit more about uh, what is their source of discomfort. And then if you've gone through SSR, probably offering some of our more general sleep hygiene strategies are also quite useful. So things like uh, temperature and creating an optimal environment are probably things we'd want to check off as well. I mostly bring this conversation to the table today to remember that it's like as much of scope of practice is kind of paramount for us to maintain as coaches. It's often useful to think in general terms that would also apply to this person. What can we share there, or what questions can we help our person to formulate so that when they do connect with their medical provider, they'll be in a better position to ask useful questions and get useful feedback, as opposed to feeling like, well, I went in, they spent 5 minutes with me, and then they left the room, and I'm not really more clear on what I need to do. Just checking the chat box real quick. Katrin, do you want to unmute and share a little bit more? Oh, all good. So Katrin was mentioning, be interesting to ask when she started to not sleep. Definitely useful, especially as like we're dealing with someone with a changing body here. Is this a recommendation based on which trimester they're in? Seeing if they're around like 3 or 4 months in could certainly be a recommendation that was given by their medical team. Hey, at this point, you need to switch because of pregnancy related complications or potential for complications. That's something that we'd want to know as well. And again, if the conversation feels like, oh, this is getting straying a little bit far from my scope of competency, sending them to their medical professional is probably the way to go. Uh, cool. Any questions or comments on this particular conversation before we move on? I'll highlight specific response here from Coach Kritika, who shares kind of a little bit from their own experience as well, and then just some general sleep hygiene practices that they've used when they were in that particular instance. I think those are quite valuable, likely for anyone experiencing sleep issues, but sometimes it's useful as a coach to pull from your own experience, especially if it's this is a generalized thing that applies to a large part of the pregnant population. Let's move on. Actually, I'm going to skip this one. Let's go to Coach Cheryl. And I don't know if we have enough time to fully explore this one, but it is an interesting and quite challenging case. Uh, as I was kind of doing a summary write-up for it, I think I put challenging 3 times in 2 sentences. So I was like, this is a tough one. But we'll see if we can dig in for a few minutes here. So Coach Cheryl mentions that they're newly certified and they're hitting the ground running with 10 signups. So congratulations to them. And they've encountered a client who is displaying some orthorexic slash disordered eating tendencies. So for those unfamiliar, orthorexia is a diagnosed medical psychological condition that is dealing with the inordinate focus on eating in a specific way typically. So if you hear the term like clean eating, it's like that, but to an extreme that is causing actual harm. Uh, and she goes on to display or to share a little bit of what this client, their 3 day food log looks like. So they ask them to complete a 3 day food log. They have some information already. Uh, and so far, they found out this client eats 1 meal per day, which not inherently terrible on its own. Uh, but these additional details do raise some red flags. So this is her daily regimen, as she calls it, 1 liter of Kangen water, pH 9.5 with Celtic salt, another liter with B12, vitamin C, and sulfurzyme, which is, I suppose, some sort of digestive enzyme. Around 12, they have their breakfast of cold pressed turmeric, pineapple, and orange juice. And then they have pH 11.5 water before lunch, which is usually around 3 p.m. Uh, this one in particular, if you Google it, seems to be mostly used for cleaning applications. I'm not really sure how much of this they're drinking, but again, all of that information together would raise some red flags for, I think, even experienced coaches. But for someone who's like within their first 10 clients, could definitely leave you feeling like there's maybe some more to explore here. Uh, they are potentially in perimenopause and suggested a doctor's visit to check hormone levels or inquire about hormone replacement therapy. This client also mentioned that they use essential oils, which is like hormone replacement therapy, uh, which again is painting a specific picture of this type of client. So, uh, Coach Cheryl is looking for a little bit of feedback here and how to help this client uh, before they have their first face-to-face session. Uh, any feedback from coaches here? Martha.
Hi, there you
There you
go.
go.
I think you hear me now. All
Hmm.
right, so I think this is way too much for a coach. This is something to do with, um, I don't know, psychologists maybe, or some sort of, it has to go deeper than this. I mean, this is not related to food anymore. This is, my guess that this is beyond nutrition. And a coach here is going to fall short, is going to feel that the coaching is going to fall short. Um, so I would certainly refer this out. I will take this one. And I've been doing this for 6 years, and I don't think it's a good match for a coaching. Mm, no, that's my take.
Fair. Yeah, in terms of the term that struck me when I was reading through this is less a nutrition client in a nutrition case as much as it's a belief structure that we're working with. Uh, And why I say this is if we look through kind of like their daily nutrient intake, it is very much they're consuming nutrients by and large and not a lot of food. It's like of the things that they've listed here, a lot of them are individually supplements, and a lot of them are things that would be associated a little bit more with like alternative healthcare practice, which is not in itself, again, a red flag, but it's just the degree to which this person is taking this might be potentially harmful. Again, reading through the case, uh, it's not super clear what this client is actually looking for. And having worked with people who are similar in nature to this person, where they display as like all of their choices are incredibly intentional. I will say that for this person. There doesn't seem to be anything here that they likely have not researched or have a very specific reason for consuming it. And it all might be perfectly fine, but we don't have that information for this client. So understanding that it's like, am I functioning as a nutrition coach here, or do you want me to kind of confirm most of your beliefs? And there may be a gap between those two things. Marta, is there something you wanted to add?
Yeah, that's exactly what I think. It's a little bit too much for
Fair.
a coach's scope of practice, basically. This has to go deeper than just the foot.
Mhm.
Oh, we don't work with just the foot either, but I mean, this is she's reaching out to a coach, and I've been with some clients who were reaching out for me, and the nutrition was the least of their concerns. And we work
Right.
through the other stuff, because you have to. But always going back to the nutrition, we are nutrition coaches. I am a nutrition coach. I do have
Mhm.
the deep health approach, but I'm not certified to go into the whys of the specific methodological approach that she has. I don't have
Mhm.
the tools.
Fair. Michelle, you had raised your hand.
Yeah, I think I agree with everything Marta says and how you put the word challenging when you were getting the synopsis. I think if if it were me and I knew this going in with this first appointment, I would be like, okay, I would probably suggest they talk to their doctor or someone or a nutritionist about their nutrition and then come back to me and I'll help them implement the suggestions. That's how
Fair.
I would with them.
That is very fair. And one of the things that actually pops up for me as well when I was reading this one is like, first, we need a little bit more information in terms of like, what specifically are you looking for from a nutrition professional here? Specifically, a nutrition or health coach. Are you looking to move away from these dietary patterns? Are you looking to kind of assess the value of these dietary patterns? Are you looking for confirmation for these things? Like, that is going to really determine how and if I work with this client. And then secondary to that would be understanding that at this early stage, it is still very much a question of will I work with this person and being comfortable with saying, hey, I might not be the best person for you, which seems to be like pretty consensus in this call as well. And that's okay. Sometimes the best thing that we can do for a client is point them in a more useful direction with a professional who has whose scope of practice deals more primarily with this type of work. So there's definitely some questions to be answered uh, for Coach Cheryl in terms of working with this person. Understand that yeah, this is definitely more of the fringe work that we do, unless you specialize in that space, and maybe there's something in her messaging where it's like, oh, more for people do fall along this end of the spectrum, which is perfectly fine if you feel like that's where I want to focus my professional development, my education, and my professional work. Uh, but yeah, this is one where it's like as a newbie coach, I'm glad to see that they're already like red flag identified. Uh, One thing that I would add is like it's okay to say no to some clients and to turn them or to send them to other professionals. That is part of acting as an ethical coach as well. So having that at this early stage may be useful in future coaching development. Uh, and then, yeah, there's likely more questions that need to happen. So feel free to either jump into this conversation and offer some direct feedback to Coach Cheryl, or if you're also in that place looking for referrals, the PN community is typically useful in sending people in the right direction. Any questions or comments before we wrap up for today? Uh, all right then. We can leave it here for today. Potentially, wanted to spend a little bit more time on Coach Cheryl's case, but I think we got through a lot of really useful work. Michelle, thank you for bringing your conversation to the table. Uh, that was a really interesting one. I think really highlights the influence of taking a little bit more of that deep health approach and using something that clients are a little bit more uh, it plays into their expectations a little bit, using something that's a little bit more practical to start a deeper conversation that gets us more buy-in for that deep health approach, I would say. Keep us updated on how that conversation develops.
Well, too. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks, gang. Have a good one.